Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Live in Italy Magazine's YouTube channel. And you can also find our interviews on Spotify and, as always, the website. Today, we are celebrating Italian American Heritage Month with a very special guest, Danielle Caminiti of Have You Covered in the Kitchen. So if you're not following her on Instagram, go grab your phone and follow her, and we'll give a little shout out at the end of how you can find her. Danielle is an Italian American living in New York and raised there. And we're going to talk today about her journey from litigation to salivation. I did not make that up. I love that. And you can find, because that's part of her, don't want any reflection there, her cookbook that we're going to talk about that too. My name is Lisa Morales, and I'm the editor of Live in Italy magazine, a travel and lifestyle publication dedicated to all things Italy. Hi, Danielle. Welcome.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me. Nice to see you today.
And it's wonderful to talk to you this very important month, October, Italian American Heritage Month. And I know that Italian Americans are all over the country, but you're from New York. So let's talk a bit about you first. Where were you born and raised?
So, I was born in New York City, so Manhattan, not far from Little Italy in Manhattan. And I was raised in a suburb, Staten Island, New York. And I'm still based in New York. So,
That's great. So Staten Island, I believe, especially after reading your cookbook, is that you lived with your parents and your maternal grandparents,
that's
right?
correct. So, we had a two-family home. My parents still live in that home in Staten Island. My grandparents have since passed on, but we lived with my maternal grandparents since when I was about 6 months old. We moved from New York City to Staten Island, and it was the best childhood I could have asked for. We were very closely knit. My other grandparents, my paternal grandparents, lived in Little Italy in Manhattan, which is where a lot of Italian immigrants settled. And so we saw them as well. So we were very much preserving our culture, traditional family, very tightly knit.
That's great. But before we go into Little Italy and your paternal grandparents, I want to ask you about Staten Island, because something that really kind of struck me was the fact that I grew up, or I was born and raised in Toronto, and went to school with a lot of Italian Canadians. And there's something that just kind of was very special to me living with your grandparents that kind of rung a bell, is the fact that you had these two kitchens in your home. So explain that to us.
Right. Well, we actually had three because my mom and dad had a basement and then a main level, and then my grandparents lived upstairs. So I had the best of both worlds, and there was food around us all the time. My Nana, we called her Nana, she was always cooking. That was what she did from the morning until the night. She didn't work, so she was a homemaker. My grandfather worked, and he was a government worker, so he would be home about probably 5 o'clock at night. And my dad worked in the city, and he would be home probably about 7:30. So I would, and then my grandparents would eat earlier. My parents would eat later when my dad got home. So I would eat dinner upstairs and see what column A offered, and then column B was downstairs what my mother was making. So there was constantly eating and food everywhere. But that said, that I think is what propelled me or kind of helped me along the way in terms of authoring a cookbook because I
Right.
while I wasn't formally trained in any culinary education, I would watch my nana cook all the time from when I was a very little young girl and my mother as well. So that said, the two kitchens really came in handy, not only because it helped me eat what I wanted to eat, but it also helped me see how they would prepare food
Yeah,
for the
that's
family.
amazing. Amazing, amazing family experience. And, you talk about in your book being a foodie from birth. I'm sure many of us can identify that, but how wonderful to have, the opportunity to have your grandparents and be surrounded by so much food and family. So let's talk about your paternal grandparents. They grew up, or well, I don't know if they grew up there, but they lived in the iconic Little Italy in New York. What was that like?
Yes. So the Feast of the San Gennaro, which we're just coming off now in Little
Mhm.
Italy every year, is really right down the block from where they settled. They settled on Mulberry Street and 78 Mulberry Street and 56 Mulberry Street. So interestingly enough, both sets of grandparents were from Little Italy and they both knew each other. It was very insular community back then. So my dad and my mom actually knew their parents knew each other when they grew up. And so the families knew of each other. And it was a very tightly knit community. Everybody knew everybody, everybody looked out for everybody. And I still feel that sense of pride and community when I do visit the San Gennaro, when I do go down there every
Right.
year. So it's definitely a tradition that I'm very proud of.
That's great. And I was there last November. And one thing that I thought was it's very touristy. So I believe, I mean, like I said, growing up in a very similar city with a lot of, immigrant areas, that, people eventually, especially once, we have careers in the second generation, you move off to the suburbs or to other more affluent areas. But what do you think is still preserved there, and what is that area's importance to Italian Americans, firstly, and to others?
I think you're right. It has decreased over the years and every year more so because as families separate and who moves where for jobs and who sells because they don't have any need to be down there anymore. I think there is still very much a sense of community among the people that were there. And I think that the way it's interesting how social media kind of helps to preserve that because you see for yourself, even though you might not be somewhere, you might be somewhere across the country, you might have had experiences going to Little Italy or having your family grow up there or friends of family grow up there. And you, even though you're not able to get there yourself, you see this and you feel like you're part of it because you're seeing the procession, you're seeing the street
Mhm.
food. And so, in a way, technology has kind of helped us and social media has helped us kind of stay in terms of like a community. Um, I think that there's very much a sense of even deeper pride because people have spread apart so far. And I think that kind of makes it really something unique and special, especially in New York. I mean, there are other little Italies around the country, but I think New York's, because I guess it was one of the largest, it's just something really special because of Ellis Island and all the immigrants that settled here.
Right,
It really makes it very special, especially this month, Italian American Heritage Month.
right. Yeah, and we won't go into this obviously now, but if you have an opportunity, look into the history of Italian Americans in the United States. It is quite wonderful. And I feel like I said, no, like you said it so nicely, that that area, Little Italy in New York, is still kind of the heartbeat of that heritage, your heritage,
It is.
Italian
It's like the
American.
pulse. It is.
Right, exactly. That's
You've heard of the
wonderful.
you've heard of the name Tony to New York,
Yes.
Tony.
Yeah,
So
that's great.
my
Yeah, that's
grandmother always used to say that to me when I was little.
Tony.
Tony means to New York.
I love it. So one thing is that I found Danielle through Instagram, and through looking into Danielle's story and getting to know her, by watching her posts and now reading her cookbook, is that your story is very similar to our story, is very similar to probably many of your stories. It's a story that's born out of passion and also during COVID. So looking back, I'm sure because of look at your success now, it's been wonderful. But talk about some of those challenges in that time when you conceived this
Thank you.
idea.
I appreciate you looking into this and discussing this. So over COVID, I'm a lawyer by trade, so
Mhm.
I'm a practicing litigator for 2 decades now. And when the courts shut down, because they did shut down in New York, I was home and we really didn't know if we would get back to work at all, because other than judges and court officers, the lawyers really weren't going into court. The courts were shut for a long time for us. And I'm self-employed. And so it was a very nerve-wracking time, and of course, a very depressing time. And the only
Right.
thing that helped me kind of feel in control and sane was to plan out my menu every day, because that was something that I found joy. I took pride into cooking, and my son was home on the computer learning. He was remote, and that was something I looked forward to every day, as opposed to turning on the news and hearing all the tragedies. I would plan my menu and just really dive into it, search for my ingredients, and in a way, it just kind of helped me survive. It was like a survival mode at that time. And then I started to, remember, oh, this is the way that Nana made it, or oh, this is the way that my Aunt Maria made something. And I would recreate it, and it would kind of, it was survival at that point. And so then I started to recipe develop, and not only make things that I knew, but made things that I didn't know, like take a stab at, tikka masala or something like that.
Yeah.
Something that's not really of my culture, but I always loved it, going out to dinners in New York, because we have a plethora of restaurants here, every type of cuisine possible.
Right.
And I started to do that. And then my son was my little taster, and he would taste everything. And then I
He's so
started to kind of like,
lucky.
then I started to like take pictures of the food, and just with my iPhone, nothing, not with a professional camera or anything. And then I would post the pictures, as a lot of people did, on social media. There were Facebook groups, there was Instagram and stuff. And then the way I would take pictures, people would say that you did a really good job at like staging the food and making it look nice and presentable and garnishing. So I started to kind of take that to another level. And then after a while, my friends and family convinced me, why don't you write a cookbook? I'm like, come on, a cookbook. They said, yes, your recipes are great. Sometimes I would just send them by email to family and friends. And they said, I
Right.
tried your sauce, or I tried this and it came out great. You should really compile a cookbook. And it was something that I always like thought I should do, but I never thought that I would do it. But being I had so much time on my hands without working, I really didn't let any grass grow under my feet. And it really kept me sane in those like very harrowing
Right.
times. Will I ever get back to work again? Will I ever work as a lawyer again? And so one thing led to another. I self-published From Courtroom to Cucina, and it's 70 authentic recipes that took me from litigation to salivation, is what I entitled it. I thought it was like catchy hashtag from litigation to
Oh, I love
salivation.
it.
And so, thank you. And so, eventually, I when I self-published, that was kind of challenging, because I never published a book before, and because it was on Amazon, so it was very difficult in terms of like navigating through the formatting, the pictures, the pixels, the resolution. And so I worked backwards, because I had all the recipes first, and then I compiled them into the cookbook. So it wasn't like I really ever set forth to write a cookbook. It was kind of like I made everything and I photographed everything, and then I worked backwards and I compiled it into a cookbook.
That is incredible. A lot of work, but I totally understand that it gave you this structure, this outlet. And I'm sure a lot of people in finding you. Did you start your Instagram during COVID then, or had you always been on Instagram sharing food?
No, I had like a private Instagram, but then I started Have You Covered in the Kitchen during COVID. So
Wow, that's
Have You Covered is my law business. So Have You Covered LLC is my law business. But then I started a spinoff of it, which was Have You Covered in the Kitchen. So um, it kind of was like a natural transition. And my dad helped me trademark the logo. And the logo is actually, oh, I have it here. It's as a pillow. It's the
oh
scales of
yeah.
justice, as a frying pan and as a colander. So have you covered in the kitchen?
Okay, I didn't realize because I saw that on your website. That is fantastic.
Thank
That is
you. And
a great
it's the Italian flag colors, red, white, and green. So green, white, and
right.
red.
Uh-huh. So obviously your logo combines those two things. So what are the things that kind of are similar in these two fields? but that maybe are very different as well. I mean,
So I
except for
think
the
one of
obvious about law, but you know what I mean.
right, right. So one of the biggest challenges I think I faced with starting the cooking venture and starting the social media for cooking and the cookbook was not only the logistics of getting the cookbook physically in place, but it was, am I going to be taken seriously? Like here I
Mhm.
am, a lawyer. I'm not a chef. I'm not formally trained, and here I am writing a cookbook. And then if and when I do get back to court, will I have an identity crisis? Like, well, what is she? Is she a lawyer? Is she a chef? Like,
Mhm.
so there was a lot of like imposter syndrome going on and in my head. And I ultimately, it proved to be a very positive thing because when we did get back to court, it was like, oh my goodness, I saw your cookbook. That's amazing that you use the time so wisely. Like you motivated me to take piano lessons, or you motivated me to, write my own book. So I think it was twofold. It not only was a cookbook, but it was also a self-help motivational book. Like you can do stuff that you really want to do. You don't have to be pigeonholed into what you professionally do. You have people are multifaceted. We have a lot of interests. So I think that was part of the stuff that I grappled with initially. Like, will I be taken seriously? But at the end of the day, it was very positive. And now from both aspects, from people in the cooking world, oh my God, I think it's fabulous that you're an attorney and you're a practicing attorney, and people in the legal world, oh my goodness, I think it's great that you cook and you do all this. So we wear a lot of different hats, and a lot of people do. So I think that was one thing that it maybe inspired people to pursue other interests that they have, because everybody's good at something.
That's
I don't know if that
wonderful. And
answers your
I
question, but that
no,
was
no, you did.
definitely
Well, you definitely answered my question, and you got me thinking because one thing I was going to say, and talking about Danielle's cookbook, is one thing I love about having cookbooks in my kitchen is they're not just recipes. I mean, let's face it, we can go to the internet, we can go to Danielle's Instagram, we can find the recipes in the caption and stuff like this. But there's something about different about having the actual book. And this is for me, this is it. It's like a memoir. Okay. So the book does something that all those other mediums can't do for you. It really brings, again, let's go back to heart and soul to why this came about. These are recipes, and you can put in your kitchen and you can get the ingredients and you can make it. But it's almost like being there with you. Do you feel that way?
yes. It's and exactly, you said it very, very well. You can always go to Pinterest, you can go online and find a recipe, but you don't have any sense of that person's story or backstory or
Mhm.
personality. And I think that's part of it. When I wrote the intro, it kind of takes you through from birth to COVID, and in very few pages, but it tells you exactly why I did what I did and what the meaning was for me. So it was very meaningful for me to write this cookbook because it was a moment in time. It encapsulated and memorialized for me a very crucial time period in my life when I really
Right.
didn't know where my life was going at that point, as did a lot of people. So I think that now, coming off COVID, and fortunately where it's past
Yeah.
us for a few years, this will always remain to me special because it was like my baby. My first
Right.
baby was my law practice and my company, which was born, but this was kind of like my second baby in terms of every day nurturing it and getting up and having the discipline to write a recipe and then scratch that and then write it again and then take pictures of it, and then maybe I wouldn't make it the same way the second or third time. So I think that was the hardest part, is not to get consumed with the television and what's going on, and
Mhm.
and wallowing in our pity about, oh well, we don't know if courts will come back and in what capacity. I was just kind of like, had tunnel vision. I put the blinders on, and I wanted to get this done. I really wanted to get this done because I really felt like I had my grandmother's voices in my head every time I would
Right.
make a recipe, and it was really very it was just a really nice introspective time for me. It was a silver lining, to everything that was going on.
Right. And your book obviously dedicated to everyone in your family, people who you love, but your grandparents. And I was thinking too, as you were speaking too, is probably you might be the first generation in your family who's actually documented. And I was thinking that must be a challenge because you learned being in the kitchen with your grandparents that probably your grandmother just did this,
Right,
you
right,
know,
a
by
hundred
instinct.
percent.
And here you have, and I realized after making Danielle's pizza dough recipe, is like I didn't have a weigh scale. So I'm going to get one before I make it again. But was that hard right there? Like just trying to get it into cups and teaspoons or ounces, some of these
Definitely,
recipes?
definitely to quantify everything because like
Yeah.
our grandparents and our ancestors didn't quantify anything. And I still too, to this day, a lot of times I don't measure anything. But of course, when you're writing a cookbook, you can't say put a little garlic and a lot of oil and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So yes, it was challenging to
Right.
quantify everything because I wouldn't necessarily make a recipe the same way twice. And I might
Right.
put one thing in and once and another thing in at another time. So that was difficult. Another difficult aspect of it was kind of remembering what maybe my grandmother would do or kind of
Mhm.
asking my mom, but we didn't have anything written down. Maybe at best they had something on an index card which was faded and probably half written in Italian, so
Mhm.
you don't really know, so you're kind of guesstimating things. And another part of it was I kind of felt, even to this day when I post recipes, sometimes Italians will say, "What do you mean you don't measure the garlic? You put in what you want." And yes and no, some people want measurements. Some people need that. Some people
Right.
never cooked a meal in their lives, so how did they know? And so I think that you have to give the measurements. So that was a little bit challenging to kind of quantify everything. Um, Another thing was that include what to include in the cookbook because I
Mhm.
could have written a Bible with all this stuff that we've grown up eating and all the stuff that I love to eat. So it's really not only an Italian American cookbook. It's a cookbook that has a lot of other ethnic cuisines in it. There's Greek,
Right. I love
there's
that.
Asian, there's Indian. So I love all kinds of food. Growing up in New York, we have everything here, which is a great thing. So it's very diverse and I really do enjoy it. And Little Italy bordered Chinatown. So of course I have Asian
Right. It
recipes
still
from
does. Yeah.
from yes. So there's a lot of that in it too. And I
Yeah.
think it's just I wanted to also being a professional, a lot of times we don't have a lot of time to cook. We're
Hmm.
working, we're busy, we
Right.
live busy lives, we have families, our children are in school. And so I wanted it to be very user friendly because a lot of people, a lot of my friends specifically, they never really learned how to cook or they never really invested time in learning how to cook because it's so easy, seamless web, Uber Eats, so I think I wanted to make it very, very user friendly and accessible to people that necessarily don't really have any skill in cooking. So there's a section in the book that is entitled Getting Started, and it tells you everything, all the tools that I use and you
Right.
need, like a scale, like you mentioned, a scale. And so there are things like that that people, they just need the basics. They need to have the basics.
Now, that's wonderful and so inspiring. And like I said, I think a lot of us were inspired in the time of COVID being home to either go back to our cooking or to learn to cook. And a lot of it was just out of necessity. It was economic, it was like what we could access and stuff like that. So it's wonderful to have that. And I was going to say, if you have the cookbook, I also find what's really helpful is that go back to Danielle's Instagram account and she offers like the recipes and also these tips because I'm sure a lot of you like me, sometimes I need a visual. Like when I was learning I don't know if you call it in your book, the Milanese, but the breaded cutlets.
Yes.
And there was a game changer for me was because I have never refrigerated the cutlets
Oh, putting
after
them in the
breading them.
refrigerator.
And I think your tip on Instagram is put them in there for 30 minutes. And I tell you, like my family was just like, oh, these are the best you've ever made.
Ah,
So that's
that's
good.
great.
So go to the book and then go to the Instagram, you have it all, right?
I love hearing that. I love sharing tips like that because I love hearing tips like that. For me, it's nice to know, um, how long you can keep something, how long something lasts, does something freeze well. Even cubing up the mozzarella and freezing it before you put it on a pizza. That's another great tip. So it lengthens the cooking time so the mozzarella doesn't burn. Things like that. I love sharing things like that. And I love when people say that they've made my recipes and they found it so easy and their family loved it. Like that makes me feel really good. But similarly, not only the cooking, it also makes me feel really good when people tell me, wow, like you had the resolve to do something. Like when you put your head to something that you want to do and you just do it. And you have the passion. People have a lot of passions, but they suppress them because, we're busy or
Right.
they feel they won't be taken seriously. Well, I went to school to be a doctor. How can I be a piano instructor? So I think that's another part of it. It really just goes to show you that, not to sound cliche, but you can do anything that you set your mind to if you have the passion to do it.
Right. And has the feedback been encouraging?
It has been definitely, I think, and at first, and now we're back in court full throttle. I mean, now we're there, but I still haven't given up on the cooking because it's something that I feel very passionate about. So it's nice to kind of fuse the both worlds. I mean, now it's kind of like a symbiotic relationship because when I meet lawyers in court, they'll say, "Oh my goodness, I'm such a foodie too. My wife has your cookbook. I think that's amazing." And so it's nice to see the both worlds kind of connect in some way that I thought was very disjointed at first. It's really
Right.
all not all that disjointed because a lot of people share the love for food, especially Italian food.
That's
So it's something
right.
that we all can kind of agree on.
That's right. That's right. So it is Italian American Heritage Month, but I will let you know that our second largest audience, at least not on the YouTube channel, on the and magazine, are from Italy. And I've brought this up before because sometimes Italians might say, that's not Italian. What would you say to them?
Well, it's true. A lot of Italian American cuisine is not Italian. It's Italian
Mhm.
American. So it's a
Yes.
very different culture. It's Our relatives came over here to America to assimilate and settle and developed their own like spin-off cuisine. So no,
Mhm.
it's not Italian per se, but it's Italian American. It's Americans of Italian descent who came over here and made their own recipes. Like for example, Stromboli. Stromboli is an Italian American creation. I don't know that they have Stromboli in Italy. It's an Italian American. Same with like Alfredo, fettuccine Alfredo, or like chicken cutlet parm. These are Italian
Mhm.
American foods. Similarly, I've never grown up eating like spaghetti and meatballs. That's something I think that I guess you would say it's more Italian American or like what you would see in like a Disney movie. It's always spaghetti. We always had pasta and polpette meatballs, but short pasta. It was never spaghetti and meatballs. So I would say that
Mm.
they're both correct. They're both distinct. And Italian American cuisine is not trying to be Italian, nor should Italian cuisine try to be Italian American.
That's very well said. Thank you. Yes. And there are so many circumstances where, I like how you say it's Italian American cuisine. Whereas when I've interviewed Italians, they say Italian regional cuisine. But that was not the case, especially, it doesn't matter if you're Italian descent or any kind of immigrant into the United States, you become part, and I think that's reflected well. You talked about that in your cookbook. There are so many cultures that your cuisine is going to change. And obviously, if you're writing a book of passion, you're not just going, I mean, obviously, a lot of it centers around your grandparents, but you talk about when you're in university and the different types of food you had. And it's impossible to live in New York and not try great cuisine from around the world, right?
Sure, sure. And it's
Yeah.
probably like that with other cultures as well. I'm sure with Chinese food, Chinese American versus Chinese from China, or Japanese American versus Japan. So it's when you come to America and you assimilate, of course, it's going to be a diverse cuisine from the original country. That's just natural.
That's right. So, as our featured guest for Italian American Heritage Month, tell us, what does that mean to you?
So, Italian American Heritage Month is something that I take very immense pride in every year. I, coming off the San Gennaro feast and festival season, feast Italian feast season all summer in over here
Yeah.
in New York, we always try to attend the feasts and bring our families there and eat at the restaurants that we know and see all friends and associates that we know and spend time with them. The Columbus Day is coming up.
Mhm.
So that's definitely part of Italian American Heritage Month. We would attend the parade a lot of years and make something special that day. I also really just, I enjoy all the parades and the processions and everything surrounding the month because I think that it's really important for us to preserve our cultural identity, especially nowadays where everybody is so spread apart. And I am still in the hub, which is great to me. I
Yeah.
feel like as stressful as it is living in New York, sometimes you
Yeah.
feel very connected to to your roots here,
Right.
and I think
Right.
that's really important too.
Amazing. That is really great. So, what are your goals? What's the next step for Danielle?
So I don't the no the goals are I love cooking still. I would and I love teaching cooking, and I love the fact that I have the cookbook. I loved authoring the cookbook, and it's kind of like I would love to do a volume two in some
Mm.
way, whether it's with a brand. I've been talking with a couple of brands, maybe partnering up with somebody there, and just because I like to, I have my favorite brands that I use, and I like to experience incorporating them in my recipes or learning different recipes with their products. I would love to do some TV work or maybe have some sort of a cooking show. So there's just a lot of possibilities. I do enjoy interacting with people. I enjoy talking to people. It's probably it's easy for me to do that being I guess going to court and interacting with lawyers and judges and being in front of juries and stuff like that over the years, I'm very comfortable with that kind of a thing. So I feel very passionate about food. So food will definitely be involved in some way, shape, or form. Maybe develop a product. I would love to think about doing that. Some of the things that I make, people say you know you should sell this, you should market this. This is great. So it's there's just a lot of possibilities, and I'm kind of mulling them all over.
Right. And I guess finding balance because it
Exactly.
started and begins with your passion, but then you don't want the whole marketing and business end to kind of take over, right? And
Exactly.
compromise that. But
Exactly.
I'm sure you'll get there. I forgot to ask. So you've been to Italy, I presume. Uh,
Yes, I've been to Italy multiple times and Sicily, a lot of different regions from Venice to Milano to Florence to Siena, the Tuscany region, Sicily, Calabria, Naples, Positano, Portofino, Santa Margherita. I've been to a lot of different places in
a
Italy,
lot of places.
fortunately, and it's a beautiful country. I love being there. I think it's the way that they live is just it's remarkable. It's they really do um know how to live life and not get
Yeah.
wrapped up in commercialism and working, and they really have a love of family and a connection with family and the land, and they make time for themselves, and I think that's kind of what's lost in translation with
Right.
Italian Americans here. Oh, well,
Yeah.
with a lot of Americans here,
Yeah, no, in
it's
general, yeah, we
right,
have to try. I
exactly.
mean, that's the foundation of Live in Italy magazine. We're not telling you to get up and go and move, even though a lot of the people I've interviewed have. But it's preserving that living authentically, stopping, you know,
Right.
We were forced
La
to
Dolce
stop, but
Vita.
now that we're not forced to stop, yeah, stop and enjoy these simpler things in family life. That's amazing. So where are your grandparents originally from, or your great grandparents, I guess?
They are from, so both sides from Naples, and my dad's side from Naples and Sicily. So Messina, Sicily, is, so I'm basically like 7/8 Napolitan, you would say, from Naples, and 1/8
Mm.
Sicilian. So my last name is actually Sicilian, Caminiti.
That's great. That's wonderful. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Before we go, I just want to say, okay, just pretend like nobody's ever followed you on Instagram and people are curious about your book. How can we find you?
So
And
you can
I'll
find
search the
me. It's
list
very
like
easy.
there
It's
we go.
my book is called From Courtroom to Cucina, but
Uh-huh.
my Instagram is called Have You Covered in the Kitchen. You like the letter U. So it's I'm Have You Covered in the Kitchen on Instagram, on TikTok, and on Facebook. So it's the same, it's uniform throughout. And or my name is you can search me up under my name, which is Danielle Caminiti, Caminiti. And you can find my book on my website, which is haveyoucoveredinthekitchen.com, or on Amazon.
That's right. Well, please follow Danielle if you're not following
Thank you.
already, and check out her cookbook and Instagram, because to me they go hand in hand. So make sure you have both. So we'll put all those links below. We are Live in Italy magazine. You can find us on all social media platforms at Live in Italy Mag. And the website is www.liveinItalymag.com. I always say to everyone I interview, because most of the time they are on social media, every like counts, every follow counts. And by doing so, you not only support us, but help grow this community of people like us who love the same thing, obviously, namely Italy. So thank you, Danielle.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. I really appreciate it, especially during this month. It's a very special month for us.
Yes.